Sure.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another group picked film for the a month, and we have our best lady friend to come back and host the show for us. Katie, why don't you take it from here and tell us what the name of the movie is for today?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm back. It's been a little while. I feel kind of rusty at this, so bear with me. It's been a few weeks. I hope you guys did okay without me. Um, Today on Inside Movies Galore, we're going to be talking about Suspiria, the 2018 Suspiria. But we're also going to kind of compare it a little bit to Dario Argento's 1977 Suspiria. The 2018 Suspiria was directed by Luca Guadagnino. And I'm interested to kind of see what everybody's take is in comparison to the original, and then just kind of talking about, what we thought of the new film. So, of course, spoiler warning for everybody. We're going to spoil the shit out of this movie. And it's a fairly new one. So, if you haven't seen it, I don't know, you might not want to continue until you have seen it. But I do believe it's streaming on Amazon. So, it's easy to locate. So, for this one, we have a similar plot. Young American dancer Susie Banyan arrives in 1970s Berlin to audition for the world renowned Helena Marcos Dance Company. When she vaults to the role of lead dancer, the woman she replaces breaks down and accuses the company's female directors of witchcraft. Meanwhile, an inquisitive psychotherapist and a member of the troupe uncover dark and sinister secrets as they probe the depths of the studio's hidden underground chamber. Dustin, mute your mic. We'll just wait here for
Hey.
Dustin to mute his mic. Yeah, mute your mic, Dustin. We're on the air and we're like right in the middle of the synopsis and you wrecked it, so I have to start
Oh,
over.
sorry.
All right, I'm going to start that synopsis over so everyone can hear it this time. Young American dancer Susie Banyan arrives in 1970s Berlin to audition for the world-renowned Helena Marcos Dance Company. When she vaults to the role of lead dancer, the woman she replaces breaks down and accuses the company's female directors of witchcraft. Meanwhile, an inquisitive psychotherapist and a member of the troupe uncover dark and sinister secrets as they probe the depths of the studio's hidden underground chambers. So that is our synopsis of the 2018 Suspiria. This watching for the show was actually a rewatch for me. I saw this one in the theater. It was one of, I think, 2 or 3 movies that I saw in the theater in 2018. And upon my first watching, like, I was very skeptical because I'm a big fan of the original Suspiria, and I have a thing about like remakes or reboots or whatever. I'm always a little skeptical going in, but I definitely wanted to see what they did with it. So I saw it in the theaters, and the runtime was pretty long. I forget exactly how long it is. I don't have it in front of me, but that was one of the things that jumped out to me when I saw it the first time. And I felt like there was so much going on, and it was such a different tonally than the original, that I really felt like it deserved a rewatch. So this was my opportunity to rewatch it for the show. And upon my rewatch, I still kind of felt the same. There's a few elements in the new one that I liked a lot. And in comparison to the original, that I felt was lacking, particularly the music, which we can get into in more detail later. But that was probably my least favorite thing about the new film. And I've heard a lot of people praise it for the score. And we can talk about the score. Tom York from Radiohead did that. We can talk about that more later. But I am interested in hearing what you guys all thought. Why don't we hear from Brandon first?
Well, I'm actually new to any Suspiria. I did not watch the first. Tried to watch it first a couple of nights ago, and then fell asleep in the middle. But I did watch them both back to back yesterday for the first time entirely. And I have to say they were a very interesting experience. Especially back to back, so it was probably good for my comparative nature. I mean, as far as Argento goes, I think that was probably one of the best Argento films I've seen. And as far as the remake is concerned, I'm still I'm debatable as to whether it was worth the purchase for me or not. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, fair enough. Let's hear from Brandon. I mean, I'm sorry, we just heard from Brandon. Let's hear from Jake. The other Brandon.
How does that sound? Okay. Well, this was definitely my first viewing of Suspiria in any form. I did watch the Argento film last night, and I watched the Guadagnino film tonight. Yes, and I was surprised to discover just now, a few minutes ago, that I had actually seen his previous film, A Bigger Splash, and I had been similarly disappointed, but for very, very different reasons. Very different reasons. But anyway, I will go ahead and say, I'll go ahead and be upfront. I am quite sick right now. I'm quite sleep deprived. I did miss little bits of both films because of that. So I'm not going to be heavy on the discussion tonight. I'm just going to chip in now and then. But for my initial 2 cents, I'm glad I saw them both. You know, it's good to say that I've seen it. As Argento goes, I preferred Phenomena over the other one. And the new one, pardon my French, but what the fuck?
Probably that ending.
That is a fair assessment, I would say. How about you, Dave?
Well, I like I've said in the previous discussion, I have been a fan of Dario Argento for quite some years. I saw bits and pieces of Suspiria when I was a child, and it has entombed itself in my mind since then. And going into this, this film, I knew that it wasn't a remake. It was more an homage, from the director, a love letter from the director to Suspiria itself. So going into it, knowing that, I went into it with an open mind, and seeing the film. No, it was definitely not Suspiria, but it had elements of Suspiria involved in it, enough to show that it had a ghost of the image. But yes, it is definitely not. It is definitely not Suspiria. I mean, it's its own entity to me. It's like got its own flavor towards.
Sure. Well, and you bring up a good point, Dave. I should just cut in to say that I think when we think about a remake or making something that's already existed, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if, let's say, Guadagnino made this film to be exactly what the original Suspiria was, people would tear him apart and they would say he was completely ripping Argento off. So he had to reimagine it in his own creative vision. And yet, you know, in doing so, you tend to have to deviate from that original story anyways, and then you get criticism on that. So I think there's sort of a sweet spot where you kind of pull from both directions. And even though I don't love this movie, I feel like it does a good job hanging out right in that sweet spot. So we'll go ahead and hear what Dustin thought.
Oh, I'm here?
Yep.
Your turn.
I think so.
Okay. Well, where to begin? So, well, with the original Suspiria is like such a major classic. Like everybody with some experience in horror knows about it, and it always receives praise for like its visuals and the music. Like, there's a lot to love about the original Suspiria. But like we said before, when we talked about that on its own dedicated episode, it was always kind of thin on plot. Like, the premise of Dance Academy, Coven of Witches, like, the premise is there, but they don't necessarily do a whole lot with it other than move from, like, set piece to set piece, which I guess is a phrase I overuse a lot, but it really applies to the original Suspiria. Whereas with this new Suspiria, they take kind of the opposite approach. So there's not as much flash in most of the scenes of the new Suspiria. However, it takes the premise and does something. It does what like a good remake or like reboot should. Like, it takes the idea in a completely different direction. And so the Dance Academy of Witches is the entire plot of this. Like, that's what everything is about. I mean, there are some really interesting kind of side plots having to do with like the fallout of World War II and like 1970s Berlin. There's a lot of it's all in the background, and I wish I understood it better, but there's a lot about like revolution and unrest.
Well, as far as
So-
that part of the film, what apparently is going on in the background is evidently he set this film in 1972.
77.
77.
77.
The year that this film had actually come out originally. But in that area of frame is what is considered in history as what is considered the German Autumn, which, if history tells it straight, it goes after it goes after. This is the part where it sounds kind of kooky, but there was a political factor that had to do with the factions of the time, that was trying to think.
Well, I feel like we're kind of getting off into
Well,
talking
yeah,
about the plot here.
I just
Maybe
wanted
Dustin
to,
should round the corner.
I just wanted to like bring that up because like this movie has a lot more going on in it than just that plot, whereas the original Suspiria didn't really even have that plot per se going on. Like, it was just like the visuals and the music. And while
Literally everything I have in my notes for the plot
Yeah.
section of our discussion. Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to forego your first impressions discussion for a plot discussion, we can just keep on going.
well, all right,
I had
fine.
that exact
My-
stuff.
My first
written-
impression is that like it had a lot of hype, and so I went into it hyped, and I was not disappointed. Like, it really impressed me, and I think I like this new Suspiria more than the original Suspiria.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Interesting viewpoint.
So
Good to have
to the point where listening to you guys talk, it's like, what movie did you see?
So I would agree. This one is definitely a lot more plot heavy, and there's a lot more subplot stuff going on, and that is one of the elements that I enjoyed about it. It felt like there was a lot to think about, and I also thought that the Josef, I believe is his name, his progression and through the film, like, I didn't completely understand it the first time. It felt like sort of a side story that kind of had to do with the main characters and the main plot. But then in this second viewing, what I kind of pulled from it more was that his character is directly connected to Susie and how she becomes Mother Suspiriorum, and how like the whatever Mother Suspiriorum stands for, like the mother of sighs, that the entire like grief idea. I'm having a hard time exactly explaining it, but her like essence or whatever has to do with grief. And there was a lot of grief from our Josef character. And so I noticed how those plot points were connected on the second viewing, where I didn't quite notice it on the first.
That's one of the
Joseph
cooler,
is
that's one of
that
the cooler
doctor,
lines from
correct?
her. You know, we need guilt and shame, but not yours.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph is the doctor.
Yeah, it was good.
Joseph
Yes.
is the in fact, he was the doctor that had to do with the child in the very beginning. That is not the same child, the same girl that we see being contortioned.
Patricia was the one at the beginning. Yeah.
Patricia disappears, but she goes to Dr. Josef for help.
Correct. See, I take this Suspiria as the Suspiria without the supernatural element, where it has more of a witchy flair to it. Because if you remember in the very beginning of the first Suspiria, when she comes through the train station, there is a supernatural element in the air that is.
Oh, yeah.
That is bringing her to the school, which is basically the plot of the whole Suspiria, which everything is having her drawn to the school, and that's wherein lies much of that. But
we could argue the same thing happens in 2018 because everything is pointing the 2018 Susie Bannion
not
to
necessarily
to the school.
It's not as subtle. You don't.
Well, the way they kind of go backwards in her timeline a little bit and show her, being very obsessed with dance. Like she comes and she knows the lead for Volk or whatever right away. Like she's not professionally trained. She comes from a Mennonite family where like they don't have TV or like things like that. So she had to try really hard to learn this dance and to develop this skill, having not actually been taught any of it, and then make her way from rural Ohio all the way to Berlin. So she was very much pulled there, whether it was because she was Mater Suspiriorum the whole time or because
on her own talent, on her own steam. I think
something got her there.
One difference, I think one difference is worth noting that maybe what Dave's getting at, I don't know, but I noticed this, is in the second one, it feels like she had a lot more choice. Like her actions led her where she was. In the first one, it was stuff happening.
It's just like, I'm here, and then stuff happens. Well, one thing I noticed in those flashbacks is that it seems like when she says like her whole life has been leading up to this, I think she may have meant that literally, because there are flashbacks of them being of her and her sisters being homeschooled, and she's mapping out Berlin, to go there, and just not interested in anything else. So it was almost like a predestination kind of thing.
And it makes you think about what was that force drawing her there? Was it because, and her mother says something about her youngest being her sin. And it's like, well, was she born this witch and was just on her mission to get there? Or was she just driven to do this and was so single-minded that once she got there, the witches could take over?
They leave it kind of ambiguous.
They do. And I guess that's the mark of a good film, right? Like, makes you think about it. I don't know. But yes, that was one of the plot differences that was really glaringly obvious as well.
The other huge plot difference was the type of dance that they did in this Suspiria.
Much more dance heavy.
No, well, this I would
they actually danced in this one.
No, yeah, there was a lot more dancing.
This
Absolutely.
This was contemporary dancing. This was modern dancing. This was not ballet.
Right.
So to me, I don't even call it dancing. Whatever they were doing in this one.
It was dancing. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, Dave.
It was interpretive dance as opposed to straight ballet.
Correct. Which
is more of an artistic form and less of a theatrical form of dance.
If you could sum up this movie in one word, it would be artsy. Like, fully agree with you there.
I mean, the Suspiria dances is more like what you would see on Dance Moms than you would see on, Nutcracker Suite or something like that.
Well, I'm thinking more Nutcracker Suite kind of dancing instead of the contemporary form, which is a form of dancing that can change like the wind,
Well, it's all dancing, one way or the other.
Yep.
One interesting thing, I'm going to be straight up and say that one scene that I kind of hated was the scene. I had mixed feelings because I was intrigued by the concept, but I hated having to watch it. Was the scene where she's doing the dance, I think for the first time,
Okay.
And meanwhile, Olga is being contorted and twisted and all kinds of what have you.
Arguably
And
the
one-
best scene of the movie.
That's
Well,
pretty far up
we can
there.
come back to that later, I'm sure. But one thing it did remind me of from my days in taking karate is it reminded me of a kata, where like the dance is the moves actually have purpose, and it's not strictly dance. It's like she was essentially doing a kata where she was attacking the other person without even realizing it. So I did like I mean, it's a very violent dance. It really is. And that's definitely what it reminded me of.
Well, they definitely frame it to be very violent. I really enjoyed that scene too. I guess you didn't really enjoy it, but I did.
I did too.
Yeah, it was
as
really
as
cool.
I have stated, as I have stated before, there are a few things in a movie that will put me off faster than an extended torture sequence, and that really
Yeah,
was a torture
that's
sequence.
Yep, agreed. It was visceral. I mean, just yeah.
See,
A good kill.
when
Yeah,
we're talking about
I just wanted to say earlier it was mentioned about how the supernatural elements appear early on in the original Suspiria. In this one, we don't really see a whole lot that's particularly weird until this scene. And I think that was a good choice on their part, because when that happens out of almost seemingly nowhere, it's like so like shocking and violent. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Like, so
Well,
I think that really adds to it too.
It's like like I said before. I think it's more of a witchy feeling than a witchy magic than it is a supernatural element, because that particular moment happened exactly at the time that she started the dance. Which I think for these particular witches, it's in the dance that their magic is performed.
Did you notice that Madame Blanc like had to touch her hands and feet in like a very particular way first?
And I was going to mention, I like that. That reminded me of the concept of stigmata, and I was wondering if that's what they were going for.
Yeah. But when looking at the plot points of this film, I mean, I do agree with Dustin that the second one is much more plot heavy. But where I probably would disagree would be that I feel like the other one was about as plot heavy as the other one was plot light. I felt there was a lot of emphasis. I almost felt like the setting of East and West Germany during that division was more the main focus, and the witches were more of a, well, this is happening in the background of history. But again, that to me, it felt like everything came back to that. Even the ending, it all came back to that.
Yeah, that seemed a little bit like a heavy emphasis to me too, where I was like, what is the point of that part of it? Like it seemed to run parallel to the story, but not really intertwine with it.
I mean, I feel like if they had been more focused on the witch and the dance, it might not have been. To me, that helped. That actually had the movie drag a little bit for me, and that I think it wouldn't have been as long, nor would I would have felt the drag that it had. I understand the purpose of it, but I still feel like it could have been executed in a better way.
I would agree.
How long was this movie compared to the other movie?
A lot.
Almost an hour longer.
Yeah.
So I started it at roughly 6, and like the credits finally began when we went on air.
It's 2 hours and
So
32 minutes.
So long.
Yeah.
So
it's a long film. There was a lot that could have been cut out. Just slow build things that it's like it wasn't really necessary, mostly around the Yosef character. But I guess this may be a good time for us to transition to talking about our characters. And
Well,
I think, our main, like, Susie is probably our best comparison character between both films as being kind of the only consistent one.
I would like
In
to
terms
comment
of,
a little bit on the length. Like when I was watching it again this time, I kind of had trouble figuring out like what would you cut, because it, to me, like everything that we saw felt relevant in one way or another. And one thing that does help is that the movie is broken up into acts, so you actually get like a title card for like each section of the movie. So it tells you at the beginning 6 acts and an epilogue. And so that kind of takes, if you take an intermission at like act 3 or so, then it's not so bad. So if you're gonna see the movie yourself, I wanted to recommend that, and be sure somebody said it. But
I wish I had had time. I needed a power nap, but it didn't happen.
So, all right, what do we want to talk about in terms of Susie's character? Because I think it's real obvious that she was a different character in this new interpretation than she was. And I don't know if it was Dustin that mentioned that in the original, a lot of things happen to Susie and she's kind of along for the ride. Whereas in this newer one, Susie tends to be the cause of a lot of things, or she tends to have a little bit more dominant role.
One thing, I think they took a lot of what happened, what she did, what was part of her character in the first film, and transferred it over to Sarah's character and increased her role.
Right.
Which was an interesting thing that I think worked, because the characters, particularly Sarah, I think came off a little more interesting and believable this go around. So,
Right.
a little.
Mhm.
Okay, a fair bit.
In the original Suspiria, Susie's character is basically just stand there and look bewildered. Whereas in the new Suspiria, Susie actually does stuff. Like we get
She owns her power.
well, she's much more fleshed out. Like we get the idea that this is an actual person. Like we see more of her backstory. We hear more about like her ambitions and like her goals. Whereas in the original Suspiria, it's just kind of like, I'm here to learn how to dance. And it's like, oh, let's investigate this mystery. And that's pretty much it for the characterization we get of the original Susie.
And did anyone else feel like in the first film that she looked a whole lot like Karen Allen? I thought so.
Who?
The one that played Marion in Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yeah.
And
Nah, no.
I don't know. I thought so.
Just a little bit.
Tired of being wrong all the time.
So in terms of our other characters, everybody kind of had a little bit different role in the newer film than they originally did. Like our Madame Blanc, much more prominent figure in the 2018 Suspiria.
Well, yeah, she also played the doctor.
Yeah,
right.
that
Tilda
was kinda
Swinton
cool.
played, what was it, three characters? Because she was Helena Marcos also,
Correct.
which is a little bit different.
Especially
so she did that, and the old man Joseph, and then of course Madame Blanc.
Well, this is, I think, her 5th film with that director, and so she has been one of the consistent bright spots in his films. She was good in A Bigger Splash as well, but she's just generally a great actress. But the only other major cast member who was the same was Dakota Johnson, the one that plays Susie. She was unrecognizable in this film. But apparently they wanted the whole cast to come over, and I don't know if I'm so pleased or disappointed that Ray Fine did not join the cast, because he actually kind of sucked in A Bigger Splash. One of the very few bad performances he's done.
One thing I was going to say about the them using Tilda Swinton for the Joseph characters, what I heard is that they really wanted that character to be like a completely new person, like not even an actor that existed. They wanted to create a character from scratch. Apparently, they were able to do that with some really awesome special effects makeup and Tilda Swinton.
Yeah, that
Yep.
character is.
And they were toying with
They did a great job.
They were toying with the idea that the actor would die before the premiere, but then they thought that was too morbid.
This didn't need that many crazy publicity stunts. Like, it was pretty good on its own merits.
Does anybody have anything to bring up about any of the other characters that really stands out to you, or that you would make a comparison to the original film?
Well, one thing for me was that I get very annoyed by misleading billing. And in this film, Chloe Grace Moritz gets star billing, and she's in the film for what, 4 minutes?
Yeah, not very much.
Near the star.
Yeah. She did a good job as Patricia, but she didn't get much to do.
No.
She's always done good when it comes to her acting chops, but yeah, I felt like she was underused in the movie.
Yeah, I have to agree with that sentiment. The other thing that I noticed is that there was a very German lady who looked like she could have been a man in the original Suspiria, who kind of looked after the girls, and there wasn't really that strong of a character in this particular film.
Well, she was still here.
Yeah.
Like, I remember her in the finale.
She was there, but it was kind of like she was part of the rest of the teachers. Like they were more of like a coven rather than a couple individuals standing out,
Yeah.
And I don't know whether this counts as a character because it's more of a setting, but I always considered the school itself, especially in the original Suspiria, as a character. Matter of fact, probably one of the most fleshed out characters in the film. And I actually did feel like they did a much better, of course, again, artistically, and we'll get to the art stuff a little bit later. Argento is near king in that aspect. But looking at them both, I really did feel like there was a lot more character in the original when it came to the school. Because the school itself really was, like I said, I felt like it was a character in the actual film. Whereas in this one, the school was just a building, really, to me.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. And there was definitely a much different feel to this space. Like I thought the room of mirrors where Olga meets her end, I thought that was a very interesting space. And then some of I think it's where they dance in the studio, like the tile floor is really intricate. But
and maybe the catacombs of where those girls were, those other girls were evidently kept, that were not part of the initial competition dance that they were. Or was it a competition dance? Or was
they were doing a performance. That was a performance. Those were the former students that were basically the witches were like living off their energy is the way I took that. They had them in the basement or whatever. But what I was saying about the building is, it was never really framed as quite the site that Argento frames the building in the original. There's a lot of focus put on the architecture and the colors and stuff. And in this one, our colors are much more muted. And I think really the only time we see bright colors at all is during
the climax
points of action. Yeah.
Well, this Suspiria takes place more so in reality because the original Suspiria has been lauded for its storybook-like quality because of like all of those like bright, vivid backgrounds, and it doesn't seem to take place in like anywhere that you could actually go. Whereas this one is like, in a way, a lot more grounded, despite like the flagrantly supernatural occurrences.
Which is no doubt part of the reason why they had all that background info about, the the divided Berlin and the World War II and all that stuff. It helped. there's that drive nowadays to make movies more gritty, more realistic, all this kind of stuff, and you knew they were going to have at least a little bit of that in any remake they did.
I don't think that's why they did that.
I also think that doing it that way with the plot heaviness took the giallo out of Suspiria and put experimental in.
Well, Suspiria has never really been a true giallo anyway,
Right.
because of the supernatural element at play. But this new one definitely takes a lot of that mystery out.
Yes.
You know, we don't have murders going on where we're not sure how they're happening. We kind of put that together right away, that these witches have some powers and they're doing some things. So yeah, any kind of giallo elements are completely gone with this newer one.
Well, this is a much more upfront horror. There's no trying to get down to the bottom of it. We know from the beginning what's going on. There's no guessing games. And
it's just a matter of seeing how it plays out.
And in reality, I do feel like I understand where they were going. I mean, like I say, I feel like just back to that whole idea of a lot of focus on the setting of Berlin in the late 70s. I do feel like that was a plot point that the director really, really wanted to focus on for this film. Whereas I don't feel it was as much related to the main story as, say, I mean, just like where it was really wasn't as big a deal with the original film as what was going on, or trying to figure out what was going on.
Sure, there's the whole Cold War elements outside the walls of the school, which I thought, you know, it added an interesting plot point, but I thought it took away a little bit from, I guess, the heaviness of what was going on in the school.
Well, I thought adding like that kind of sense of, I wanted to say sense of place. Like, I feel like that did add something to it too. But like this is a more fleshed out like world, and like the things that happen around the school matter too.
That's a fair point. You know, I felt that it did, at least for me on the second watch, like I said, it pulled those two plot points together.
So plus
the character of Joseph.
Plus the political turmoil that's going on outside the school is used to dismiss the first girl's dismiss Patricia's disappearance because she was sympathetic to that cause.
Sure.
So because in the original Suspiria, you know, we see Patricia's character die, like basically killed by a demon in the first like 5 minutes. And in this one, she just kind of disappears until we find out what happened to her much later. And that kind of gives it a bit of a smokescreen for it's like, okay, well, maybe nothing weird happened to her. Like maybe she really did, you know, join, you know, that underground. I hesitate to use the word terrorist. Maybe she really did like go off with like those resistance groups. Or at the very least, that's how a lot of the characters interpret her disappearance. And so I think that adds something and makes it more relevant to the overall story, because people aren't immediately investigating. It's like, oh, she disappeared, you know, suspiciously. It's like, no, there's kind of an explanation. So
and again, the setting, I mean, having that as a basic piece of the setting is one thing, but then dwelling on it throughout the film is a different thing entirely. I agree with you that having that setting can work out as far as the background, but I felt like the setting was much more than the background and much more of a major piece of the story. Almost to the point whereas the witches themselves were more in the background to the setting.
Well, it had a... well, they mention at one point that the dance that they perform was created, like, the dance movements are sort of how, like, the witches, like, do their spells. Like, they more or less say that at one point. and they talk about how this dance was created like during the time of the war. And one character uses the phrase, the Reich wanted to keep our minds closed and our uteruses open.
Mhm.
And so it was related to
Well, I mean,
women
again,
maintaining their independence and power.
I mean, it all goes back to the psychiatrist and what happened to his wife. At the end of the day, it all goes right back to that. That's where everything meets and dissects at the end.
Yeah, and in this climate, people were like grappling with like the ramifications of what happened like in that time period. Like that's another line in the movie. Are there guilty men in Berlin? Everywhere.
And again, that what they wanted to eventually do to the doctor was shrouded in somewhat of a mystery for me. It kind of became muddled in the very end. What they entirely wanted to do with him once they, because it ultimately it became known that that when they were trying to.
So they perform this. The climax of the movie is when they perform this ritual that will transfer Madame Blanc into Susie's body, and so they say they want to witness, and so they pick the doctor and basically kidnap him and like make him watch as the finale happens.
But then,
and they, like Dave said, they don't really allude to what they're going to do with him afterward.
Correct.
So.
But one of those witches supposedly appears as his wife, right?
Yes, and gives him hope that after all these years, she's still alive. And there's actually one of my favorite moments in this is like after it's kind of been revealed that it was like an illusion, and they bring him into the school. They're chiding him. It's like you should have listened to her. You had years to escape Berlin, but you didn't listen to her. And kind of playing into like his feelings of guilt. And like they made the comment that it's like, you just tell women come to you with the truth and you just tell them not to worry about it and ignore them. Like that was a main running theme too. That he didn't really believe like what was being described to him by Patricia about what was happening at the school.
See, if the plot was somewhat fleshed out, I would have wanted to know, like maybe what they would have wanted to do with the doctor in the very end. What was their ultimate goal, bearing him in mind? You know what I mean?
They probably would have just killed him. Like I did love what they did with him though. Like after, I'm sure we'll talk about the scene in more detail, but afterward, they just let him go, and they kind of they stripped him naked for this thing, and afterward, he's got like blood splattered on him from what happens in the finale, and they just kind of like put his clothes back on, so like his shirt's not tucked in, like his stuff is like all like tilted and like wrinkled, and he just looks like he has had his mind completely broken. He's just standing there like, oh, and they just calmly like walk him to the door. It's like, okay, find your way home. Bye. And he just like stumbles off into the night. Like I laughed really hard at that. But digression. Anyway, continue, Dave.
Well, like I said, ultimately, a lot of what went on between that was more or less experimental. It almost could have been said that the video that was shown through those particular elements could have been something similar to like those mind controlling videos that they said came during the war. The almost subliminal video messages.
Hey, Dave, could you bring Katie back in? So she had a technical issue on her end.
Oh.
Okay.
No yawning.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that this is again, character-wise, plot-wise, I can understand where it is. I felt like they were trying to do things in a
Alrighty.
much more artistic manner.
Sent the invitation, and she should be here shortly. I'm guessing.
Yep, there we
Welcome
go.
back.
There she
Yeah,
is.
Yeah,
There you
I'm
go.
not sure what happened there. Sorry. What did I miss?
Okay.
More or less.
Not much. Sounds good. All right. Well,
it was
did we
difficult to
move-
summarize.
did we move on to special effects yet?
we could do
We
that.
can.
I was gonna
could.
say, I feel like they were trying.
Well-
This one director was trying to out art Argento through this in several cases.
The way I would summarize that is the original Suspiria is more flash, less substance, and this is much more substance, less flash.
Agreed. And you
Yeah.
can argue that both ways, and I think it probably evens out in the end.
Pretty much.
You know, you just one way on the other. I personally thought the special effects were pretty damn good in the new one, and I originally thought there was a lot more CG. Once I did a little research and realized that they did a lot of practical stuff in this one, I had a lot more respect for it. I've seen, and you can find on YouTube, there's videos about how they did this scene with Olga in the mirror room and stuff, and some really cool practical effects, which of course, some great practical effects in the original as well.
I would have to say the only part where they used CGI was during the mirror scene, per se.
Really, no CGI much to speak of, other than some green screen. They give her a green sleeve so that they created that when you see her limbs, like her arms and legs bending behind her, those are prosthetic limbs that they created, and then they cover her actual arm in a green sleeve so that they can green screen it out or whatever. Look it up on
Pretty
YouTube.
cool.
There's like a making of video where they break that down, and it's really quite interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Sounds like this similar.
I kind of wish that had been on the. So this got a Blu-ray release. For some reason, it did not get a 4K release, and the Blu-ray itself is fairly threadbare. So there are a couple of 5 to 10 minute like featurettes, but that's really it. So there was a lot that went into this that I really wish we'd gotten to see.
Might be
on the physical release.
Might be because that the studio behind this is actually Amazon's.
They cheaped out on us.
Which they might have cheapened out on us commentary wise.
Damn you, Jeff Bezos.
Well,
Netflix
could have been part of their purge, so to speak.
And it could be like some of these streaming services. They want you to keep coming back, so they have their own thing of how they do it. Could be that Amazon does cheap releases for a couple of years and then does a good one, but they haven't put out enough yet for us to be sure if that's what they're doing. But
yeah,
it would make sense.
Now I will say artistically, when it comes to effects wise, when we're looking at settings, of course, Argento with the original, his use of the color red, which psychologically, and again, I can't think of any other place to really put this other than special effects, but psychologically, the color red really does activate the kind of fight or flight response. That's actually one reason why you have to be careful when you're using red, but it also is, because of that, it is great at getting the attention. I actually believe that, especially when he uses the school, the designs, the colors, everything pops to that point where it really does become. Now, gore effects wise, definitely the other one was really good at the gore effects, but at the same time, it doesn't make it or break it for me. But I'm not the kind of person who likes that sort of thing. So I can understand, though, for those who do live for the gore effects, that would be a major thing in those. films.
I would have to say that I have to give respect for the special effects being not as much as CGI for many of the scenes, and give them kudos for that at least. And I mean, there are things that I admire about this film compared to the other film. Like I do really like the contortionist scene. That I mean, I think that can be said for a lot of things, but I do like the fact that that Tilda Swinton could actually do like 3 roles. I mean, I thought to pull those off and to be to not make us think that she's Tilda Swinton, you know, was actually pretty good. Other
The
than
makeup was actually quite good. I have to agree with that.
that,
It was spectacular.
Yeah,
I mean,
they did a great job. I watched a little something with the effects makeup artist, and the process is amazing. They did a really great job.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree. That was a strong point with this one, especially because Swinton. I don't know if y'all necessarily agree, but I feel like as far as like her eyes, I feel like she's one of the most distinctive people in acting. If you just look at, because she has that weird stare, and it works really good in a lot of roles. And I didn't even spot her as the doctor, really.
I didn't
And
either.
that's fairly impressive that they managed to so completely hide her, like that one feature that usually you're like, yep, that's Tilda Swinton.
Oh, I mean,
Like-
I recognized her as the doctor right away, but that was because of the voice.
how?
Ah,
Oh, okay.
It was because the voice was easily placeable throughout, but
mean-
everything else was actually very hard. Like I say, makeup-wise, I wouldn't have recognized it, but the voice, I placed it right away.
The makeup job they did on her was incredible. Like
yeah.
again, that character is fully naked at one time, and you're convinced that it's a man. Like you can't see any seams. Like it is perfect. Like it is actually
Right.
perfect.
When she was also Helena Marcos, and that was a pretty gruely looking witch too. And that was
See,
quite a makeup job also.
there is only one other actress that Tilda Swinton reminds me of, and that would be Kate Blanchett.
yeah, a little bit.
Because they're I see when I saw Lord of the Rings, I thought that was Tilda Swinton at first. So
What?
I before seeing Kate Blanchett's name,
Okay.
I saw Tilda Swinton in her voice and her face. But when I realized it was Kate Blanchett, I was like, oh, okay.
And also
two actresses.
talking as far as makeup as well. Like I said before, Dakota Johnson was almost unrecognizable in this one. I mean, I have not yet subjected myself to the 50 Shades movies, but just last week I watched her in Bad Times at El Royale, and like I said, she starred in A Bigger Splash. In all 3 of those films, she's like, "Yep, that's Dakota Johnson." It's like you don't even have to strain. You're like, "Oh, that's her." And this one, it's like, is that her?
Yeah, I was not familiar with her from before this. So I'm trying to think if I've seen her in anything.
We should probably do Bad Times at El Royale eventually. That was a fun one.
It was a fun one. I have to agree. It was different. Very different vignettes in there.
Oh, I see. She normally has bangs. Okay. Well, I guess we can kind of move on from special effects. We can come back if we want. I have lots to say about the music. And in the newer one, Tom York from Radiohead did the score. And I have heard nothing but praise for the score of this movie. And I have to say that upon my first watching, particularly, I thought it was terribly forgettable. Like, there was nothing about the music that stood out to me, and I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Goblin's score for the original. So I was really going into this one hoping for some amazing music, and I felt like in terms of an atmospheric score and sort of a theme song that kind of works, it was fine, but it didn't impact me musically the way the original did. And I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, you're comparing the music in this to maybe the most iconic music from a horror movie, aside from Halloween. Like,
yeah, it's
so,
a
I mean,
definitely
it's
something to live up to.
It feels like an almost unfair assessment, like right off the bat.
But I wanted it to be great music. Like it could have been a synth score by somebody I never heard of, but I wanted it to be catchy. I wanted it to be something I could go back to, and it just wasn't.
I think it is because of just like the way the music complements the scenes and like how it makes you feel like the appropriate emotion for the scenes. I mean, I like the
but
soundtrack a lot.
I wouldn't listen to the score of this movie outside of watching the movie. I wouldn't have any interest in listening to the score. The score for Suspiria I listen to all the time.
Well, I did like this one. I had actually been curious about the music because the song Suspirium was on the short list for original Oscar songs. And I don't remember which song that was, but the songs that played in the film I thought were pretty good. I think I agree with Katie. I wouldn't necessarily listen to the soundtrack on a regular basis, but you know, they added to the film, I thought.
See, as far as the music goes for me, I have to. I think I feel like the same as you, Katie. That they were somewhat forgettable. And but the thing is, it kind of reminded me of like it's like Radiohead kind of listened to the music that was in The Lords of Salem and just did his own tune.
Actually, that's a pretty good comparison because the way this movie ends, it feels kind of like what Rob Zombie was trying to do with the ending of Lords of Salem and just utterly failed. Well, as apparently the only person here who likes the music, like I enjoyed how. Well,
none of us dislike the music.
On it yet,
okay, well, I feel better now because it was like
I don't dislike it. I don't dislike it. It just
I haven't gotten to listen to it enough to be able to like pick the songs out like by track name. But I think my favorite piece of music is during the finale when you have exploding heads and just like geysers of blood and gore, and it's just like this very calm, very mellow. It's like it's hard to describe really, because the music is more about like making you feel than like rocking out to, kind of like the original Suspiria music, where each theme is a memorable like almost like power theme. Whereas this was much, much more subtle. And so having been much more familiar with that kind of score for this story, like I can see how you guys are kind of like underwhelmed. But I really enjoyed it and I thought it complemented everything.
Actually,
I would say I actually agree with Dustin on that take a bit. And because I did consider overall, not about the main theme, but overall, I actually liked the music from this version of Suspiria over it. Not because of the other one being lacking, because the Goblin theme is classic, but it wasn't classic to me because I had never heard it before yesterday. Okay. So I was able to come upon it with fresh eyes. And I'm not as big a fan of Goblin as most of y'all are. And it's an amazing theme, but I felt like the variety in the Radiohead theme of the other was much more outspoken. I felt like the main theme was reused a lot in the original, and it is an awesome theme, but I did feel like variety's sake wise, the more recent film was much more variety heavy and kept changing it up a bit more.
I fully agree with that. Like with the first film, I heard the theme, I was like, oh, this is a cool theme. And then about the fourth time I heard it, I'm like, and then about the 30th time I heard it, I was like, okay, that's enough. They really didn't mix it up all that much. But there was definitely more use and variety of music in this one. They're both good themes, they're both good music. But yeah, they really overused that main theme in the first film.
And a good theme it is. It's just I would
Yeah.
have loved to have seen more variety, especially when if something more like that could have been done, then I think that the soundtrack not only would have been well known, but it would have probably been the one of the best soundtracks in horror.
It is.
And it wasn't as good. I misspoke earlier and I goofed and I apologize. I actually did see Luca Guadagnino's. I'm going to butcher that name every time.
I'm even going to try to pronounce it. It's a crazy name.
I did say his previous film, but it was not a bigger splash. His previous film, if you can believe it, was Call Me By Your Name. Now, that was a film that had some awesome music.
Oh, that
but
film.
I mean,
Yeah.
And that does give me a little bit more respect for the director, because that was also a film that disappointed me, but it was not a bad film. But I do give the guy props for taking different approaches to film. Like, if that's not what I meant to say, trying something new each time. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I
definitely did that.
I think I want to compliment just the use of sound overall, because Mother Suspiria is the mother of sighs, and we actually heard like a lot of sighs kind of incorporated into the sound design of this. Like during the dances, like there's like a chant. There's like a chant that is like all sighs, and actually it was pretty creepy and added a good amount of tension to a lot of those scenes.
I suppose I'll have to listen to the soundtrack.
Kind of.
It's like.
I suppose
that kind of plays on what one of my biggest gripes was in terms of the music. There was a lot of dancing, which I really loved about the new one, but a lot of missed opportunities to utilize music where they're specifically dance without music. And it's like, no, this is a great opportunity for some really good music. Like, I wonder how impactful the scene with Olga would have been to some kick-ass music.
Well,
that's where my brain was going.
Well, it was about that was like a plot thing. It was like teaching her to dance without like a rhythm. It's like I want to see what your rhythm is. So I mean, it's not like they just didn't do it.
Well, I didn't feel like it was necessary piece of the plot where they could have used music there, but instead they chose to use no music, and it seemed like a missed opportunity for me, and I don't know that it was super crucial to the plot to have her dancing without the music.
Well, it was explicitly part of the purpose of the scene.
See, I actually believe that they could have created a theme for that, as it would not necessarily be the music she's dancing to. It could be the music that she is internalizing as she is dancing.
Okay.
A theme that they could have utilized to illustrate her, what she is, and the rhythm, and her own rhythm. So I can see that as a way of doing it.
On the other hand, I will say that both the original Suspiria, I made the same comment last week on Phenomena. I feel that Argento sometimes overused music, and he would sometimes use it too loudly or in the wrong place. And I think this film had a more restrained approach to using music, and I kind of like that better.
And that's funny because I like the opposite better. I really like.
I have to agree.
Argento's misuse of music. I would agree. He does. Sometimes it's too loud. Sometimes it's in weird spots. Like in Phenomena, there's like Iron Maiden in like the weirdest place where it doesn't really make sense. But
it clubbed me over the head with it. Yeah,
that endears me to it for some reason. I don't know.
God damn, I love Phenomena.
See, my thing is, I wasn't reading too much into the music. I wasn't hearing what you guys were experiencing in the thing. I kept hearing Lords of Salem in my ears while she was doing the contortion dance.
Oh, this wasn't 10% as bad as Lords of Salem.
Actually, I really liked Lords of Salem, so
I'd have to see Lords of Salem to understand where you're coming from. So
let me put it in perspective. So when I watch a movie, even if it's a movie I hate, like I finish it. Like I always finish the movie no matter what. Lords of Salem is the only movie that I can remember shutting off and then like finishing a couple days later. Like it was awful. Like easily his worst movie by a mile. Like I kind of can't believe it got released, frankly. It's so bad.
That is one I have not seen yet.
It's garbage.
Okay.
Avoid it.
Yeah, that's why I haven't seen it. But we're
Sorry, Rob.
hitting the 1 hour mark here, so I think we should probably get to our favorites so we can start wrapping up. I mean, we could talk about this thing all night.
There's a lot.
But I guess
there's a lot to cover.
there's definitely a lot. But in terms of favorites, I think for me, I definitely didn't like this newer one better than the original, but I wouldn't say that the newer one was a bad movie. I think I did like the Olga scene, and I also really enjoyed that there was just a lot of dancing in general. And the tone and the feeling during the dancing was all really powerful, and I liked that a lot. And I thought it was, in general, a visceral movie. The ending climax scene didn't really fit for me personally, which I think took away from it. That was probably my least favorite part of the movie. But overall, like the original Suspiria, the music, the tone, the visuals, those are all things that I loved about it. And I thought the new one did it justice. I liked the muted tones and the use of the space and the Berlin Wall and all of that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of things I liked, but I think overall my biggest favorite was just more dancing. How about you guys?
I actually do not have a favorite scene in this because though I did not mind it, it was okay. I didn't love it by any means. And most of the scenes to me just kind of melded in. The only ones that stuck out were the ones that I didn't like. Like I didn't like the ending. I felt it was just over excessive use of gore for little to no reason. And I had trouble even watching. Now, I think that the original dance contortion scene was one of the best done, but is one of my least favorites because I don't like the gore in it. So, again, I guess that would count as one of the least and best for me. Whereas the original, I have plenty of scenes I loved in the original.
I would have to go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say I have to agree that it's easier to come up with stuff I didn't like than stuff I did. I appreciate very much the technical and narrative artistry of that scene with Olga, but God, it was painful to watch, and I hated that part. And I think it could have been trimmed somewhat. That's one part that could have been trimmed. And the end, yeah, I felt dirty watching that. I was like, this is like so over the top evil craziness going on. I kind of like the follow up with our main character and the doctor. I kind of liked her showing up to give him closure. I liked that, and that may have been one of my favorite scenes.
That was a beautiful scene.
Yeah, so there were some good parts, definitely, but it was easier to say what I didn't care for.
That's fair. That's fair.
My thoughts are similar to yours, Katie. The only thing is, I wouldn't necessarily call the dances that they were doing real dancing from what I'm used to. It's more experimental dance, and that's where therein lies my difference in what kind of dancing dance really is. Because there are different aspects of dance, all kinds of dance, and it's just this was a new age nuance kind of dance to me. The kind of dance where you go into a theater and you don't know whether there's going to be a rhinoceros coming out of their bunghole or not. you know, or something to that effect while the dance is going on. You know what I mean?
I feel like you've been to one of my burlesque shows, Dave.
I was gonna say the kind where you have to like use your brain and feel emotions, but okay.
But
I'm kind of reminded of that South Park episode where they were doing the Christmas pageant. They were all dressed in gray and moving around in random patterns.
Happy, everybody happy.
You just never know.
That's just the music they used.
You just never know what kind of dance that they're going to come up with, and that was my train of thought, and that to me was the kind of dance that they were trying to portray. So that being said, there. I mean, I couldn't see the greatness in the soundtrack this time around. I guess I kind of prefer Goblin over Radiohead, though I haven't really fully listened to the soundtrack, and it was very muddled and very blah to me at the time of watching the film. So it wasn't like it was something like you know, that kind of thing.
The actual clown music.
It's much more subtle, yeah.
It's much more subtle and low, and that's why I said the music kind of reminded me of Lords of Salem. So to me, I see the good in this film, and in ways it kind of took away from the original film. So I like it because it's its own entity. I respect it for the homage that it is, but I didn't necessarily like it.
Well, the thing with this is that it's a very different movie from the original Suspiria. Like, this is more of the original Suspiria is more of like a fun romp. Like, during its slow periods when it's trying to have a plot, like, it drags like painfully. But the new Suspiria, with its emphasis on that, like, it engaged me a hell of a lot more than the first Suspiria did. Like, I watched them back to back today, and so it was really noticeable. I mean, like, the first one is just like a fun, you know.
I felt the second one dragged way more than the first one for me.
You know, to me, like, not as much, because it's like, okay, it's like, well, how would you even make cuts to this, you know? But anyway, so my favorite scene was the ending that seemingly everyone else hated. In which the ritual to transfer Helena Marcos into Susie is performed. And so how do we set the stage for this? So it happens in like this concrete room, like in the basement of the school. So all the other girls have been like bewitched into dancing naked. So they're just like naked people dancing. You know, the coven members themselves are, you know, wearing like ceremonial furs and they're doing rituals. And when Susie reveals herself, so Madame Blanc doesn't want Susie to go through with it, and so she tries to stop it. And Helena Marcos, like, she just makes a gesture and like almost decapitates Madame Blanc, like, magically. Like, it's a spectacular effect. Like, and then Susie reveals herself to be Mother Suspirium, and a literal incarnation of death shows up, and everyone who supported Helena Marcos as the leader of the coven is killed by death. Like, their heads explode. Like, it is insane. It is madness. Like, that poor dude on the floor who they picked to be the witness, he's just like rolling there. He's basically just rocking back and forth. It's like, oh my God, what's happening? And that's kind of the reaction I had. So I loved that scene. And the girls who were killed by the witches and basically brought back as like flesh puppets, like, Susie asks each of them, you know, what do you want? You know, she basically gives them the option to like stop being reanimated and like finally die. And I thought that was very poignant. And when Susie becomes the mother, when Susie fully transforms into Mother Suspirium, she opens her chest up and the wound looks a little bit like a vagina too. There was a lot of like symbolism in that too. Like, there is so much going on in that scene, and they're just like exploding heads with just fountains of blood, and like the lighting changes. It was like, I felt like I was seeing actual occult magic. Like, I loved that ending. Like, it was amazing. And
That's
I don't know
where
why it turned so many of you off.
that's
Oh,
where
glad
it
that you
reminded
enjoyed
me where it turned colorful just a little bit. That's where it reminded me of Argento. I like over the top gore, so I really liked that scene, even though it didn't really fit the horror, the serious tone that this film was taking.
Well, it felt like everything had been building to that moment when we were going to finally see like all of this like psychic energy like come out in these occult powers, and it really delivered. I mean, Death showing up like an actual dude, like showing up and being Death, that took me a minute to figure out, but after that, it was just like, I'm making like the rock out sign with my hands here. So it was amazing.
Those are called the devil horns, Dustin.
Fine, devil horns.
Argento means three things to me: bright colors, goblin soundtrack, and the creative use of maggots. Those are the three things that Argento usually means to me. And of course, there wasn't much of that in this current one. So,
but it was good enough that it didn't matter.
And really and truly, the one thing I was reminded of the most of this film, whenever the dance was done, was Dance Moms, the reality TV show. That's what I thought about the entire time. It was Dance Moms.
You've mentioned this like 8 times, and I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Well, you're probably lucky that you don't. But it's a reality TV.
Oh yeah,
it's a reality TV show about a modern dance studio, and it really is. It was modern. It's modern dance. This is the kind of dance those girls would be doing if they were in a studio today.
Tonight on Crime Grandpa.
Only without the occult element, probably.
Hey, you don't know that.
They were a bunch of
if it boosts ratings.
Contemporary dance.
Like I said,
so
you don't
right,
know
guys.
That.
Time's ticking away here. Do we have any additional items of note that we want to bring up briefly before we close things up?
Despite all the naysaying, see it. Like, just see it and make up your own mind.
I agree. I definitely think it's worth a watch.
Lot better. It is a lot better and a lot deeper than we've probably made it sound. And it's definitely worth your time.
I wouldn't say better, but it is definitely
better.
And given Dave's frequent references to something by this director, I'll just go ahead and say, thank God it's not directed by Rob Zombie.
Well, that would have been a very different film.
I think we can all agree on that.
I would not have watched that one.
Well, basically, Rob Zombie's Lords of Salem tries to do a similar thing to what this movie did. It just fails on literally every level.
That does not surprise me.
Well, no, I usually like Rob Zombie. I even like Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, but Lords of Salem was just so bad. Like, it was the worst thing. Like,
not really.
God damn.
All right. Well, next week we'll cover Lords of Salem. No, I think next week we're covering Akira, right?
Yes.
Akira.
All right.
Good.
To be Jacob's choice as this particular time.
Excellent.
One I actually do own.
Well, I guess we can wrap up Suspiria 2018 and move on with our closing promotions for ourselves. And Jake, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are and where you're from?
Okay, my name is Jake. I spend. I'm a movie collector, TV collector, fan, what have you, here in Central Virginia. I do a lot of guest appearances on Brandon's channel, Septum Sin versus the World. We have a recent video that went up where I talk about my anime influences, the part 1, the early years, I guess you could say. And of course, we have the usual set of videos, which I'm sure he can fill you all in on. I do apologize for sounding so off tonight. I'm just, so hopefully we'll be back in great shape for next week.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Brandon, how about you?
of course, my name is Brandon. I go by Septum Sen for our channel, Septum Sen versus the World, which is a channel dedicated to the preservation and enjoyment of physical media. We do pickup videos. We talk about the upcoming releases, and we do various other things like top 10 lists, as Jake has mentioned, and movie reviews. Most recently, this week, I've actually gotten back into the reviewing game and have done 3 reviews. One anime review last week, which was equally, if not more horrifying than this week's suggestion, Suspiria. And I've got 2 more horrifying films, such as Camp Blood Kills and the film The Occultists, which I will be covering at the end of the week.
Ooh, sounds good. How about you, Dustin?
Well, I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee. You can find me on Twitter at The Crypt of Horrors, which is also the name of my personal channel, which is getting more videos at some point this week. A lot going on. But with summer starting up, I should have more time to actually put into the channel. I'm also on Instagram at DHRHunter. And yeah, just follow me across all these different dimensions, especially on Twitter, because I hang out there a lot nowadays.
Sounds good. I will go ahead and give my spiel, and then Dave can close us out. I am Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I have been off the podcast for a few weeks, so it's nice to be back. I'm assuming that you all missed me very much. My schedule's been extremely busy.
Well, I did.
Well, thanks. Because I'm a body positive horror artist, alternative model, makeup artist, burlesque performer, producer, and all the things are happening right now. So if you want to get in touch with me about some of that stuff, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Patreon. Yeah, I think that's all for that. Or you can come and see me this Saturday in Milwaukee. I am producing a show called the Grindhouse Teas Art and Oddities Fair, and that is going on at the Walker's Point Music Hall on 6th and National. And we're going to have live bands playing. We're going to have a burlesque variety show and a handful of artist vendors selling their cool creations and stuff. So it's $8 at the door, and that's happening at the Walker's Point Music Hall Saturday, June 1st in the Walker's Point neighborhood. Aside from that, I've just been keeping busy with Dedgar's Dark Coffin Classics and with Trauma, and I'm going to be heading to Days of the Dead Indianapolis coming up here July 5th through the 7th. I'm actually co-hosting the makeup effects competition, so come out and see me there. And as always, follow me on social media for all the updates. And Dave, why don't you go ahead and close us out?
Alrighty, and my name is David Straggy. I run Inside Movies Galore, but as you well know, we all run it now. So definitely check out the next week's episode, which we'll be doing another journey into the animation world with Akira, which is coming up. Just recently, myself and Septum Sim and Kabuki Jake went on about a couple of animated films. If you can check out the mermaid films animation wise that we went on, and those will be showing up on the Delusions of Grandeur channel. So definitely check those out, and I'll definitely have some more cool reviews coming up. So I just not too recently started production with Brad Twig's newest feature, which is called Death Board. And so stay tuned for more news involving that. And I think that's everything. So stay tuned for some exciting discussions coming up. I know we have a couple more, like maybe, what is it, one more discussion after Akira? Or
That's the Night. Was it Night Riders?
Night Riders. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my pick for this cast pick series of films, and that is a little known film by George Romero.
Oh yeah, so some exciting stuff there, folks. So stay tuned for more cool stuff ahead, and thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe, everyone. Everyone, say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.